Welcome to the DrFrankenSteve podcast with your hosts, Dr. Frank Williams and Dr. Steve Snodgrass, MD, FACS, where we discuss a broad range of topics without limitations. Let's get to it. Here's Dr. Frank and Dr. Steve.
Hello, welcome. This is the DrFrankenSteve podcast. I'm your host, Frank Williams. This is my co-host, Dr. Steve Snodgrass. Today, we're going to do a little different podcast. So instead of heavy into medical or mental, we're actually going to do something on art and then voting and how they're actually, how they kind of met at a crossroads. So, and then I'll cover some different statistics. We don't endorse or promote any political party. However, we do think it's important that you vote and vote by whatever your conscience and your policy deems that you need to do. So without further ado, I'm going to let Steven start, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump in with, my boring data. But I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, this whole topic is, when you look at it, it blends art with politics, and you never really knew, I never knew some of these things were going on until I did the research on it, and I was really quite fascinated by it. And if you compare what was going on in post-World War II to right now, there's a lot of, obviously there's similarities, but one of my favorite artists is Jackson Pollock. And I don't copy Jackson Pollock. Yeah, I remember being I was 18 years old at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and I saw paintings of Washington crossing the Delaware and all those kinds of things. And then I saw Jackson Pollock and his abstract art. And I thought, that is, to me, is fascinating. And so at that time, he didn't paint with knives and sticks like I do, but I will admit a lot of my paintings look like his paintings, but I didn't set out to copy him. It's just you don't know.
The style is there.
Yeah, you don't know what you're gonna get with a knife and a stick, and you're throwing paint everywhere. Except it gets all over me and my hair and my everywhere. Yeah. So anyway, back in the day, I'm talking in the late 1940s. Most Americans, including President Truman, had a very strong dislike for abstract art, and that's putting it mildly. They just did not like it, they didn't get it, and most American painters were just traditionalists, if you will. And basically, here's a painting of a flower, here's a painting of a barn, and a field, and a tree, and that sort of thing.
A carriage coming out of a barn.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that. And so up until World War II, the United States really had very minimal influence in the whole art world because it was all in Europe. And so most Americans they were just traditional painters. But then after World War II, a little bit later, there were a group of radical American painters. And what is reported about them is they leaned communist, but they ended up painting this abstract expressionism, which was used as a tool against communism. So it's pretty fascinating, and the CIA got involved in all of this, and I had no concept that all of this was going on at the time. But it's like artists like Mark Rothko, de Kooning, and especially Pollock, they demanded the world's attention because they did all these different kinds of work that had never been seen before. And it was called Abstract Expressionism because it really had no form to it. It was just a whole new explosion of color, texture, and a new format, a new artistic format. And they were viewed as quite radical at the time. And so the CIA looked at it, and they said that we feel like this art can be a major political weapon against communism. And they were the only ones that thought that, by the way. because
And why was that?
Well, we'll get into it because at the time, as you know, at the end of World War II, there were two superpowers left, the United States and the Soviet Union. And at the time of all of this propaganda, the Soviet Union was spending a reported $250 million a year for a communist propaganda machine.
That's a lot of money back then.
Think about $250 million a year in like 1946, 47, something like that. That's amazing. That's amazing. And the CIA was very upset because the Soviets, in their propaganda, were using words like freedom, peace, justice, that sort of thing. And so the CIA said, like, how can we combat this? And somebody came up with the idea of like, well, we're losing to the communists in this word of ideas and all that sort of thing. So they chose Jackson Pollock's art. The CIA chose Jackson Pollock's art. And here he is, he's a reportedly left winger, and they choose his art to be the symbol of American freedom and individualism. And so at the time, in the 1930s under Stalin, the Soviet Union, most of their art was what's called socialist realism. And it had to be an official government art.
Sanctioned art?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, if you deviated, if you're a Soviet artist and you deviated from that style, you did not deviate long. Because you were, I don't know exactly what they would do with you, but you would not be
the gulag.
You would not be painting any longer. And so that's the exact opposite of the United States. So they had these paintings that were just terribly mundane. I mean, boring, just boring. And it was to me anyway. I'm not discounting their talent, but I'm looking at it, I'm going like, to have a Russian street scene or something is not like, oh, that's just gorgeous. I want that hanging in my living room.
Yeah, it's not expression.
No. Anyway, the very existence of abstract expressionism was about the subconscious creation of art. And it did not resemble the real world. It resembled the inner world of the painter. And so the whole point was, you can be an individual. You can be free to do what you want. And that's the way Pollock painted. Pollock was so avant-garde, if you will. He had his canvases were on the ground, and he would just fill up paint cans with holes and walk around and all that sort of thing. And his paintings had cigarettes and cockroaches and all kinds of things. I mean, and he was just out of bounds, literally. And so these paintings were just seen as the ultimate in your own individualism.
And anti-communism.
And so there's a former CIA agent. His name was Donald Jameson. And this was a quote back in the 40s. He said it was recognized, and I'm going to read it so I won't mess it up. It was recognized that abstract expressionism was the kind of art that made Soviet-sanctioned socialist realism look even more stylized and more rigid and confined than it really was. And that relationship was exploited, and some of the exhibitions Moscow had in those days were very vicious in its denunciation of any kind of nonconformity to its own very rigid patterns. And so one could quite adequately and accurately reason that anything they criticized that much that had heavy-handedly was worth support. So the CIA was monitoring what Russia was doing in the art market, and they said, that's where we can exploit them. So it was a pretty brilliant idea, because there was like McCarthy, there was Truman, and they both did not like, these left-wing artists. So the CIA had to covertly promote Pollock and his colleagues who were doing all this abstract expressionism. They had to promote that covertly from our own government. So it's kind of wild. And so they set up a program in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York with the help of the Rockefeller family. And so they pumped money into this, and they did art shows all over the world. And they had an agreement with England. It was through a magazine called Encounter, and they promoted abstract expressionism all over the world. And it was called Operation Long Leash. And so this was a full-blown, like, program operation that was against the Soviet Union. And I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah,
I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. And Jackson Pollock said, painting is a state of being. Painting is self-discovery. Every good artist paints what he is. He clearly demonstrated abstract expressionism was free from any kind of politics or any kind of ideology. It was completely free. So basically, you have a left-wing artist who, if he painted what he painted in the Soviet Union, he wouldn't be painting anymore. He would be dead probably. Yeah. But the CIA got him on the cover of Time magazine. They made him the most successful painter in the world. And he made a fortune off of it. And so all of it was from the CIA directed program. It's pretty amazing. And so they also had in the 1950s, so many people had started coming to the United States and New York. New York was now the art capital of the world because of this. And so all of that shifted. Everything shifted from this traditional realism to abstract expressionism. And today, even today, abstract expressionism is the #1 art form in the world. So it all started back then. And Eisenhower was more amenable to this than Truman was. And I thought this was a very good quote that Eisenhower had. He said, as long as our artists are free to create with sincerity and conviction, there will be healthy controversy and progress in art. How different it is in tyranny. When artists are made the slaves and the tools of the state and become the chief propagandists of a cause, progress is arrested and creation and genius are destroyed. I think I kind of think that says it all, doesn't it? And so the concept of abstract expressionism, after they look back on it, they see it as like a defining point in history in regards to being anti-communism, because the abstract expressionism was the antithesis of communism. And so that's how all of that started. And I thought it was a brilliant move done within.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I didn't realize any of that was going on until I started doing the research of about Pollock, and then started going back and finding all the stuff about the CIA and Russia. And so that's how all that began. And that's all I can say about that.
Yeah, that would be considered a disinformation campaign, even though it was to promote something. It was disinformation against communism. So yeah, that operation. Yeah, I never knew that. That's fascinating, especially when you consider the art world, and you consider that America leads the way in art, no matter where you're at in the world, because art outperforms the S&P for the last 30 plus years.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's an investment. If you make the right one, I mean, it's pretty incredible about what it has done through literally the decades.
Like a piece of fruit on a canvas.
Yeah, and Pollock, he used house paint for.
Oh, did he?
He used house paint.
Well, yeah, I imagine there wasn't a lot of specialty paints around back then.
No, and so it's like he would use like dried brushes, buckets with holes in it, and then they called him Jack the Dripper, because that's what he
would swing him, or
he would just kind of walk around. He would literally some of his paintings were huge, and he would just walk around on the canvas. And so he was so out there at the time, and but
especially for back then, during that very conservative time, And
it's like anybody who is a He was a visionary,
Mm-hmm.
and he said that basically you're looking at artistic freedom and individualism. That is abstract
And
expressionism,
that is the American way.
and that's the American
And you
way.
should have that in your country.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
No, that's, like I said, that's a fascinating story because a lot of people are confused, and I'm not here to give you, and I'll put some information out, a little link on the podcast about where you can find some of the information I'm talking about. Don't go to these off-the-wall sites. Make sure it's, like some of the sites, go to the government sites, because there's the history is there, and the actual history, not some made-up stuff. Same thing like the Webster Dictionary is a very good read on what basically voting is. So a lot of people have a confusion about, I hear the word thrown around, so Steve, all the time, democracy. We got to save the democracy. We're going to be in the democracy. We're technically not a democracy. For those who may already know this, that's fine. But for those who don't, there is a difference in a democracy and a constitutional republic. The United States is technically a constitutional republic. And the difference is a democracy is basically almost like mob rule. So the majority of the people rule overall. And a lot of socialist countries use democracy style tools to govern their people, or let their people think they're being governed. Where we are governed by a charter or a constitution. For our case, we have a constitution. And that constitution was set forth so that you have some large states, you have some small states, and so that the larger states didn't run everything. So if let's say a state like California, even though under the Electoral College they have more, voting power because they have 54 delegates or 54 electoral votes, they couldn't run everything. So a poor little state like, let's say, I don't mean to say poor, but like our state, Kentucky, has about 8 electoral votes. They couldn't outweigh us because even though their population is so massive compared to the population here, we wouldn't be able to be fairly represented. So what the founders came up with for America is they wanted a way to run in a democratic way, but yet make it so that each state is represented by a governmental style of government. Which means that instead of one big giant election, and I don't care what election it is, I always tell people you should vote. I serve so you can vote, and veterans are amongst the highest, population of voting percentages in the country. Even though I think that's great, it's still unfortunate because so many people are able to vote. Veterans voted about 74.5% of the time. But if you look at all the different states, you got the 50 states in the District of Columbia. So it's literally like having 51 mini elections. Mm-hmm. And then those elections are whoever wins those, or whoever the delegates are then decided by individual states. All those delegates are put together, or the delegates put all the electoral votes together, or the state commissions do. And then whoever's running will take the presidential election, which is coming up here in about a week or less now. You have to get to 270 out of the 538, electoral votes. So to get to 270, you have to reach that. So delegates are put together, they're brought, and then that's how we know that. Sometimes we know that evening, sometimes we don't know the next day, especially if it's close in the tie, then that's a whole nother subject.
And sometimes we don't know for months.
Yeah, oh yeah. You got a hanging Chad, a hanging Don, and hanging Sylvester, whatever. But what ends up happening is each state's delegates are then presented, and they don't have to award them, but they go by this is the Democratic part, they go by the vote of the people. So because you'll have a popular vote, say candidate A got 75 million votes. Candidate B got 71 million votes, but candidate B won the Electoral College. So even though candidate A got 4 million more votes than candidate B actually got those 4 million votes. It didn't matter because the election, he might have, or she may have won the election by 10,000 votes, because that's the way it's set up for the electoral votes and how the delegates are set up when they go up there. And that's how we keep a fair and equal system. There are a lot of people who want to do away with electoral college, but there'll be a lot of people hating it in the long run because you'd basically be back to mob rule. That means whatever the policies in those larger governing states, they would rule the day when it, do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
They would rule the day when it came to policies in one area of the country on the West Coast don't always align with policies in the East Coast. So that's why it's so important for us to keep the electoral college, in my opinion only. And
Well, yours counts.
it does.
Yeah.
For me anyway. And so that's why it's important for everybody, because I hear a lot of people who complain, but I'm like, did you vote? No, there's no use. There is a use. Your voice is being heard. I don't care if you're an all red state or an all blue state. If you're in the opposite or opposing party, you still need to vote to make sure your vote's counted and to make sure that, you know, you are actually supporting the process, which keeps America free and prosperous country, the greatest nation in the world. And if you say, I really don't like the way it's ran, yeah, there are planes leaving every day for other countries, and you can get your passport updated. And I know I'm going to be asked to edit this out, but I'm not. You can just,
No, not by me.
you can just head on and head wherever you want to. And when you've been there for a while, because I've lived overseas in different countries, and when you've lived there for a while, and it don't take long, you're going to find out you came from the greatest nation in the world with the greatest people, period.
Don't you believe that I've had several discussions about this with people, and the way I feel about it is that we had people fight and die for the right to do this, to
Absolutely.
vote, and a lot of people just disregard that. And I think you need to take a hard look at what was done to allow these freedoms. And so, in my opinion, if you don't vote, then you should really keep your mouth shut.
Yeah,
You don't
you're
have
disrespecting.
Yeah, it's just like, in my opinion, if you don't vote, you really don't have any right to complain.
You don't have a dog in the fight.
You don't. So it's like, hey, you could have voted, you could have made a difference, you could have been out there, living like we're supposed to be living. We were given this privilege.
And what happens is with those people, and I understand this from this viewpoint because of serving paramilitary and in the military as law enforcement in the U.S. Army. A lot of them will say, well, that's my right not to vote. That's my right not to do this. And then that's right. But the same people you're sitting there going against and complaining about gave you the right in this country to not vote or to not to speak your mind and do whatever, because you're not going to go to a lot of countries and do some of the protesting and some of the rebel rousing that is done here in the U.S. And it's freedom of speech, like it's freedom of religion. So I ask people just a lot of times, just think about it. You can get a mail-in ballot, you can go early voting. You don't want to be in long lines. If you're going to be gone or out or whatever, you can do absentee ballots. It's just very important that everybody vote. We've gotten very lackadaisical as a nation about that. And I think it's important that we get back to it because, whether you're in agreement that the socioeconomic conditions in the U.S. have gone down some, or whether you're doing better. You either want to keep doing better or you want to improve on what's been going on to make it worse for you. So you can look at both sides of the spectrum. And for those, I'm going to speak to those who are in the different voting groups, but if you're an evangelical or a Christian, you are probably the largest, by statistics, the largest voting group in the United States, yet you're also the laziest. So I'm going to tell you what, no lie. Jesus always says, pick up your cross daily and follow me. You need to pick up your cross and head to the voting booth. So you need to get out there. You need to make sure that your vote's counted, and you go with, I don't care if you don't like personalities, if you don't like skin color, if you don't like hairstyles, if you don't like the clothes they wear, you're going past that. We've gotten so petty and so become such I'm good. So we have become such a nation of, I'm so offended, that offended me. Get past all that. Look at the policies, look at your family, what's good for not just you, but your family, your kids, grandkids, your neighbors especially, along with your family and your community, and then the nation as a whole. But Christians, you need to do something and step up. You need to take an energy bar, whatever you got to do, and you need to step out there and you need to get to the voting booth.
Why do you think that is? Why, if you're like one of the largest voting blocks in the country, you've got a lot of power, you've got a lot of say, and everybody has a certain opinion that they want to express. So I just wonder why they don't vote.
I just think it's laziness.
Really?
I do. I just think it's pure laziness. You can't give it. I mean, if you say, well, I really don't have a ride, you can find rides. There are rides available to get you for free to the voting booth and back. You could probably ride with one of your neighbors. You don't have to discuss politics, but just go vote. Nobody sees what you vote on because that's your vote and your right to vote. And I will tell you, a lot of times we get people here in the U.S. that once they become citizens, they're more patriotic. And I know I'm going to catch a lot of flack for this, but they seem to be more patriotic than a lot of my fellow Christians and a lot of people who just decide not to vote. Now, if there's a legitimate reason why you can't, completely understandable. But Hispanics are among some of the highest voting blocs. They vote pretty much even across party lines. Almost, it's like 45% lean Democrat, 45% lean, or about 49% actually, lean Republican. Same thing with, if you're looking at, and these are all, I'm talking about Christians, not Protestants, with Black Protestants, Christians, it's probably about 80% to 20%, 80% towards Democrat, 20% towards, Republicans. And then when you get down to even, which I group in with this, with like, the Catholic votes, a lot of Catholics, they're split almost evenly. You got about 44% lean Democratic and about 52% lean Republican. And this is all from, the government website. You can look on the Bureau of Statistics and all that and find this, and I'll have links, like I said. And then you have unaffiliated people who are either atheist or agnostic. And I always find it fascinating because atheists and agnostic tend to vote more towards the Democratic affiliation more than a Republican affiliation. And that would make sense because you want to be, freestyle and do whatever you want, anything goes, no matter if it's good or disgusting. But when you look at the percentage of people overall in the U.S. that are 18 years or older, you're looking at about white non-Hispanics, you're looking at about 60%. And then Black non-Hispanics, you're looking at about 53% vote. And that depends on the election because that could go higher or lower, obviously. You're looking at just general Hispanic, that's about 44%. And then Asian and Pacific Islanders, they're at about 45%, and sometimes as low as 25%. So we go from about 25% of the general population in different demographics voting all the way up to about 60%. But that's still a lot of people that aren't voting that can.
Yeah, I mean, it just
and like I said, veterans are the bad boys because we voted about over 74%. And non-veterans, they're at about 60% rate when they vote.
Yeah, well, it's like you say, the main thing is you have this privilege to get out and do that, and I feel it should be exercised, and if you don't, then
That's
keep
right.
keep your mouth shut.
And nobody tells you have to be a big political activist. If you see something and you want to vote, vote. You see something you think needs change, you don't even have to get out of your house. You can get on, everybody has a phone now. You can get on your phone, find out your local rep, your state rep, your, the Congress and senator, send them an email. Hey, I think this is an issue I don't think is right, or this needs change, or we need help in this area. Start a movement within your own household, to push for it. And so that's pretty much what I have for this podcast. I went my little rant. So.
Well, I've got a few things. I got just a few.
That's fine.
But and I want you to help me with that. But where in history has socialism and communism worked to allow people to become their very best? Where has that worked?
It has not.
Never.
That's the term where the term oligarch comes in.
Yeah, it does not exist. It does not work. And so it seems to me like history, you teach history for a reason. Mm-hmm. And basically it's like if there's a mistake or there's been a major problem, don't repeat it.
Right.
And if things are going great, what did they do to make it great? Mm-hmm. So, but I've never seen, not in the world's history, where socialism and communism have worked to the betterment of people. It's like, and so I don't understand how people can think that way when all you really have to do is go back and look at your history. Mm-hmm. That's all you have to do. And the other thing too, it's just built the socialism, communism is built on a group of elitists. And then I'll say this, what have they done to put themselves in that category compared to the rest of the people? Because what they want is a permanent underclass to serve them.
Absolutely.
And so all these people who are complaining and, rioting, doing, whatever, disrupting.
Yes.
You think they'd be able to do that in a communistic society? I don't think that'd last very long.
No.
So,
And political violence on either side is wrong.
Yeah.
If you're on a conservative side, it's wrong. If you're on a Democrat side, it's wrong. If you're a libertarian, of course, they'd just be like, hey, man, what's up? Get my marijuana. And I have libertarian friends and love them to death. So, but they're pretty much the easygoing crowd to me. And then you got independents. And the thing is, like you said, people right now during this current election, and I said this could be for years from now, you just need to get out and vote. But people are, burning ballot boxes, drop-off boxes. That's just not right. That doesn't solve anything, and it just builds dissent. It builds, a negative impact on the voters, and you're also robbing people of their votes and their right to speak.
Yeah.
And so I just, I'm a big believer in, live and let live in that way. Put your viewpoints out, study your viewpoints, study about socialism. I think if anybody does a deep dive into socialism or communism, it still comes back with the thought that I think this would be pretty good to do this here. Then you are a moron.
yeah, pretty much. And I like to just pose this question. In your lifetime, my lifetime, I even asked my dad, who's 96 years old.
As a veteran.
Have you ever heard anybody say, I want to live the Chinese dream? I have. Have you? I want to live the Russian dream. Have you heard that?
No.
I've not heard it. But I have heard, I want to live the American dream. I have heard that all of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for a reason. And the other question is this. Have you ever seen people like, let's just say they're in Miami and they're American citizens and they build a homemade raft and they float from Miami to Havana to be on Cuba's Got Talent? I've never seen that.
No, and you probably never will.
No, but I pose those questions for a reason, and really, I would like for people to think about it. The Chinese dream, no. The Russian dream, no. The American dream, yes. And I will say that communism is the antithesis of humanity, and that's really all I have to say.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to lead the U.S. right now, and then we're not going on political rants again, but we're trying to lead into where people are wanting social credit scoring. So where you shop, how much you spend, what areas you do it in, which tells your belief system. And all you got to do is look at the Chinese system that's doing it currently, and you're going to run into finding out that doesn't go over real well. No. And if the people could, they would revolt against it, but they can't, because you can't even find the Tiananmen Square incident in most of their, or any of their history books. Literally, nobody even knows in China what that was. If they're young, they've never heard of it, and they wouldn't. But, when the term democracy, if it's used correctly, is one thing. When people say, well, we've got to protect the republic, you'll hear that, or, we got to protect democracy. Sometimes I think people confuse it with we got to protect the democratic process, but they don't mean we have to protect democracy, because that's not what we are, if you want to get technical. And I think most people are aware of that, but I think that gets confused also, which is the term they like to use when they want to get rid of the electoral college. And the founders did that, not because it was the best method, because they thought that was the most fair method. And they said, we need to come up with something where we can, divide the larger sections of America with the smaller sections as America grows and we get more states into the Union. Because you're going to remember this happened. We were pretty much a democracy up until the 1700s. And then we went into a constitutional republic when the Constitution was born.
I'll just say vote, because this really could be your last chance. So
no matter where you fall on the spectrum.
Yeah, and that's all I have to say.
And with that, we'll end, and we thank you, and stay healthy and stay safe. We'll see you at the next podcast.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to the DrFrankenSteve podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit follow or subscribe on the link provided so you can stay up to date on new episodes. Until next time, stay healthy and stay safe.